So, taking a big breath, feeling it touch every tissue in body, from toes to head, and melting every bit of tension with it on the exhale. Let's take a few of those as we wake up every part of the body while simultaneously letting it melt into the seat. And notice any feeling of added comfort or peace that comes in. Start including that feeling in what's being touched by the inhale. Invite it more and more to the forefront. And with each in breath, you can choose peace, you can choose presence, you can choose to be here. Each out breath, letting go of anything that's not needed anymore in this moment. Any remnant of the day that can be put down. And with these two movements of letting go of what's not needed and choosing to be here, find our intention for coming here. Choose consciously our intention for being here. We continue breathing this way, finding our intention for being here, and asking ourselves how we want to be right now. Still finding myself inspired by the way that Boris was looking at his wife, noticing that energy and the way that I want to bring it to every part of myself, to every being, every being internally and externally. The intention to learn and to internalize the Dharma for the benefit of all beings, internal and external, big and small, normal and weird, wherever they may be. And with the last cycle of breath, find the signature of the qualities that you want to bring into our session today, not just the conceptual, but the signature, the felt sense. And let's begin our session. All right. So, congratulations, everyone, for sticking with the book club for this long. We're now done with section 1, starting section 2. Isn't that awesome? We covered a major aspect of the whole thesis of the book. I wonder if I ask people some questions, they could answer them. Let's see. I'm seeing smiles, so it's probably not so bad. You know what I want to do is each one of you is interested. Tell me one thing you're taking away from section 1, from all the chapters that we've discussed, from everything that we've been through. And let me paste the document in case you want to consult it. When you're ready, just unmute and jump in.
The genes metaphor has really stayed with me, I've noticed. And I like how you unpacked it in I think the section for this week, like, taking off tight pairs of jeans versus putting on progressively looser pairs of jeans.
Mm-hmm.
I used to wear tight, skinny jeans before COVID. And then during COVID, I discovered elastic waisted pants, and have now whenever I put on a tight pair of jeans, it's like, what is happening here? So very just, somatic kind of metaphor.
I think I love the bike metaphor. I think that's taught really well. Like you have different construction, you can construct it like from loose parts and everything will be fluid, or just from one solid unit, and it might make the goal. It might be faster, but less resilient. Let's take it like that. Less adaptable. Better. Getting.
I think I took away that giving like compassion, understanding, gratitude to parts which I perceive as positive in the moment is good because it reinforces them, but even, and maybe even more importantly, giving it to parts which I perceive as holding tension and as negative in the moment, it's also good because then the tension kind of melts away often and they reveal, well, that they're also just positive parts, but maybe without all the information.
Mm-hmm.
I come back a lot to the model of each part of the mind trying to envision something of reality, which gets farther and farther from it when we build upon the lower levels, and about the friction that comes from the because of each model doesn't really have a reality or corresponds to some reality, and the dukkha that comes from the friction and the idea of one trying to understand and receive of by each of the parts, the other parts, and the motivation of all this mess is actually positive, and trying to encourage cooperation between those parts, and trying to get to the lower, more lower parts that has less distortion and less friction, and to connect to them. This is a model that actually I like.
Anyone else who's off camera want to say anything? Going once, going twice. Okay. All right, beautiful. So you guys have actually covered all of the three main factors that we talked about as determining the depth or height of a basis of operation. How non-attached we are, right? How many of the genes, how many of the layers we've managed to put off. How collected the mind is, right? Which corresponds to all of the coordinators coming into agreement about a particular quality or some type of better principle of organization. And the wisdom of mind, which is how much those more sophisticated principles of operations are now ingrained and embodied, in a sense, in the operating assumptions of each coordinator. And in some sense, this is also a summary of this entire section, because as we go higher in terms of a basis of operation, we get to the point that we're going to explore in this next section, which allows us to release the karma, to release all of the depth, in some sense, that the mind is carrying that's preventing coordinators from naturally collaborating on anything coming up in experience, both in terms of perception and in terms of behavior. And we're going to see how climbing basis of operation, and generally how this process of seeing the emptiness of all phenomena lets us move down this path, lets us continue down this vector of development. So we're all just walking each other to the same home. The Buddhists talk about the way that the point of the path is to remove ignorance. It's in all of the traditions, all of the turnings, all of the lists culminate with letting go of ignorance. And that's avidya or marikpa. We spoke about those words in Pali and in Tibetan. And there are, or you could say that there is ignorance in every layer of the world model. Both when we were discussing awareness, we talked about a hierarchy of spaces of awareness. And when we talk about genes or fixed intentions, we also spoke about the way that they're layered, such that every constraint that we put on is then the foundation for the next constraint, the next limitation, and we limit and we limit and we limit. And in some sense, every layer, every samsaric layer like this, every loop in this spiral convoluting inwards, has a foundation that we are ignorant of. It becomes an unconscious subject and can only see what arises within its constraints. And so in some sense, it's ignorance all the way down. But there is also a final ignorance, so to speak, that goes away, that allows a complete basing in fundamental consciousness, a complete seeing of the basic act of movement from samsara. But either way, all the way down, we go through the same process, which is we see, and I want to share my screen so that we have this image here. Share screen. Everyone see? Before, we were speaking about the way that every choice, every bifurcation in the road allows us fewer options, right? This is the essence of this pant leg being tied here. Hope you can also see my cursor. The fundamental of emptiness lets us see that no matter how constructed we are, no matter what form there is, there's always this move, it's always a more expanded awareness that lets us see the component bits. And of course, this is an image that I've prepared a certain way, but if I could zoom in like this on any image anywhere and start seeing its pixels. And so that's what we do layer after layer of mind. We go down into the bits such that we see to normal, such that we see not only the form, and here the form is me playing a person playing a piano or hanging out at a party or dancing, but also all of the component bits, all of the parts of the coordination act, right? The balance for standing, the assumptions coming into whatever emotion is being emoted in the moment. Any type of sensation that gets abstracted into an act that's a compressed form of all the information embedded in the greater field of sensations. It's like we take this bitmap, we take all of the possibilities and just draw one particular shape from them. But of course, between any collection of dots like this, we could draw any line, we could draw any shape. And our point here is to see both the shape that we've chosen and that there are other possibilities, which is what allows the mind to then loosen its attachment to the particular shape. We see that there are other options, and then dynamically update what's possible. So the claim that I make, oops, let me stop this. So the claim that I'm making in this chapter is that this is where all spiritual traditions lead. They don't necessarily lead through emptiness. Emptiness is a very Buddhist thing. But ultimately, where we go is we lose the capacity to be confused in the sense of what's fundamental consciousness and what is the type of construct that we're calling genes or intentions that we then mount in the back of our minds and then loop into again. And once that happens, once that fundamental delusion goes away, and all samsaric structures, when I say samsara, I mean this loop within loop within loop. When samsaric structure arise, they are in such alignment with fundamental consciousness that they no longer obscure it, and it no longer happens unconsciously. It involves conscious choice. Meaning we see by this definition that samsara itself is not a bug in the system, so to speak. It's not a problem in and of itself. It's just the way that we forget ourselves in it. We become unconscious to the fact that we've chosen to create mind constructions this way and loop inside of them. But as long as we don't forget it, there can be benefit to spinning up samsaric agents like this. let's see what else we have here. So every layer that we sufficiently align with the ground or with whatever is closer to the ground as we peel the layers, then becomes a foundation for the next seeing of the deeper ground, or what before we thought was a ground, as empty. So in some sense, at the beginning, we start with the top of the pyramid, the most contracted assumptions. And if we recall, we were speaking about what assumptions we jump out of with every basis of operation. In the beginning and last week, we were speaking about the narrative of a reified self. And then jumping out, and we see thought and emotion, and then space and time. And we move closer and closer to the base of the pyramid. And the more we deconstruct, the more any of those assumptions can now be consciously chosen. If I let go of my story of a reified self, and especially if I also climb a few stories down, it's easier for me to start changing my narrative. I'm less attached to this thing that's been an unconscious choice for so long. And the more we peel, the more we have dynamicy with each of those layers, the more it's easy to see the emptiness of the previous layers. Now, I want to make sure that we understand that when I say see the emptiness of a layer or see the component bits, it is an experience that we can have directly, and we'll play with that a little later. We'll do an exercise. But generally speaking, you just live your life normally. A lot of this seeing of the bits in a way that allows the updating of the model happens in the background. It's not like we go and sort of start seeing the matrix, you know, like the okay, I'm sure you all know what I mean. the fluxing, moving green symbols, right? That before they become the woman in the red dress. It can be like that. We were speaking about psychedelic experiences and how they sort of force the mind into that state sometimes to the detriment of being able to construct. But through this practice, it's done much more gracefully. It's not something that we get stuck on. I think the last point that I wanted to make in the summary here, two last points. One, in the sense of this being a developmental path, if we were to directly perceive reality without these mediators, without those constraints, it would be too intense. It could literally fry our nervous systems. Anyone who's done a very high dose of psychedelics, certainly something like 5-MeO DMT, that immediately washes off the capacity to constrain, to contract, knows how intense it can be, knows how it can really fry the nervous system. Especially as resistance is there, but even without it, it can be too much. And to be able to perceive reality in this way, there needs to be a process of the sophistication, of the increased sophistication of the mind, the increased sophistication of all the different parts, all the different neurons, all the different edges of the network, learning to collaborate better. And that's something that we can either, so this configuration of seeing fundamental consciousness, embodying fundamental consciousness without samsaric layers of constraints, is something that we can either do by first really deconstructing the mind, which is the jhana path. That's the point of it. The mind becomes more and more collected because it's holding fewer and fewer assumptions about the world. That's the essence of that practice. And when we become fully deconstructed, let's say, or as deconstructed as can be, then there's a way to get a glimpse of Nibbana, get a glimpse of fundamental consciousness in a way that starts updating the assumptions of the mind from their foundations. But it's not something that you can take off of the cushion. It's not something you can take into the world. So that's the essence of that path. It gets you to a place where you can reliably stay, at least in meditation, and hold the reality without constraints, but only when you're very settled and collected and peaceful and sitting in some retreat in a way that's disconnected from your normal life and identity and acts of collaboration. This is why in the first turning of the wheel, the assumption was you can only be awake, you can only fully be what they call an ahant, someone who's uprooted all of the fetters, if you're not a householder, if you're a monk, if you're a renunciate. But then in the later traditions, when we learned how to do this, not just through deconstruction, but by upgrading the sophistication of the mind, upgrading the configuration, we learned how to allow this perception of fundamental consciousness without filter, even in reality. And that requires more of a process of growing up, what's normally called growing up, which is increasing the complexity of the mind and all of its participants to take reality in and handle and embody the complexity and energy so that it doesn't overwhelm the mind. And that's why it requires letting go of karma or integrating shadow. You could say the same thing in modern psychology terms, so that the fundamental schisms of mind, which prevent the mind from upgrading this way, those disagreements upon which the mind normally constructs on, when they're taking off, then the mind can upgrade into the configuration that's fine enough to hold all of the immense energy that comes in from reality that's continually bombarding us in every moment. And that because we need the constraints, we're constantly in tension because we're fighting against it. So again, to take in this intense reality, we either need to stay so far away from everything that we know about life, sitting in some cave on a cushion and deconstructing, that it's simple enough to handle, or we need to upgrade the system. And as part of the upgrade process, we have to let go of the karma or the trauma or the shadow that's creating schisms all across the foundations of the mind and are preventing this upgrading process, this growing up process from happening. So in this chapter, we mostly talk about the emptiness aspect because it is crucial, regardless of which path we're taking. In the context of growing up, again, unless we go this emptiness path and dissolve the karma through emptiness practice, seeing that the conflict was never there to begin with, so to speak, that it doesn't have the type of inherent meaning that entails some comic book hero type of origin story, right? I was bitten by a radioactive kindergarten teacher and now I'm grumpy for the rest of my life. We see that experience, this programming that we have with new eyes, and through dissolving it a little bit, seeing the component bits, we can craft another story. A couple of book clubs ago, we were speaking about the way that we change from a conception of trauma. Someone did something to me in kindergarten, or my parents did this or that, or did not do this or that. And through the power of choice plus gratitude, we get into a perspective of initiation instead of trauma. It stops being something was done to us, and it starts being something that we choose, that we even are proud of. And when we're proud of something, it's much easier to collect the mind around it effortlessly. It's already something that we like being. We agree that this is what we are, versus there's always the parts that are like, this should not have happened. This should not have happened. Everything is bad now because this has happened. So this is the home that we're going to. It's not about completely eradicating samsara. It's more about transcending and including it, such that we are not confused by it anymore. There's no more the ignorance in the sense of we're trapped in it. We find the home that all traditions lead to, which is being able to interface with reality, to take it all in some sense, or at least in without the constraints of samsara, and then either move directly from it, being moved by it. And this is a lot of the experience that people talk about when they're, let's say, moved by God. Often it's this sort of flavor. Or we could still from there, excuse me, for the right purpose, still spin up a samsaric agent and move more like a normal human, but one that's not, one that's continuously, let's say, perceiving the cosmic joke. right? The joke of, oh, all of our struggles, all of our issues are just mind made in this samsaric way. I thought that I had to compensate for the way that my parents treated me, and now that comes into every interaction, every workplace, every activity that I have in my life. It's just, oh, I don't have to be a victim to this mental model that was created before my adult memory was even created. Then we get home. How does this all land? Yeah, Alex.
So I have a question about, so yeah, I'm kind of wondering, what is the qualitative characteristic of being in touch with fundamental consciousness? Like, in other words, how do I know that I am not just spinning in samsara, but I'm indeed kind of seeing things sort of like, what you just described? Like, so what's the quality in consciousness that kind of, how can one know that that is the case?
Yeah. So with every level of ignorance until we get to the bottom floor and it's removed, the only thing that we can know is what basis of operation we're in, based on a few parameters that are described, or that eventually I will describe in the practice book, or that I can point to you in a one-on-one session. And it corresponds to the degree of the expandedness of awareness, how boundless it is in dimensions. And each of those correspond with one of those ignorant assumptions being taken away. On the bottom floor, where you're completely jumping out of samsara, complete basing in nirvana, it becomes obvious. It's like there's in the sutras, it always says that when the Buddha woke up, he immediately knew, and the work was done. And he says that he sees the house builder, and no longer will the house be built. And of course, that's very dramatic. It's very first turning. It's very like, oh, I'm just going to hang out here in Nirvana forever. Like, fuck everyone. Of course, that's not what he did. He ultimately was driven by compassion and went out to teach this in the world. But for the most part, this is the end of it. It's like, oh, I see how not to construct anymore. And the basic drive of construction, the basic reactivity of the samsaric story is seen as it is. It's seen as the type of artificial activity that it is. It becomes very, very obvious. It's not something that there could be doubt about. It's such a complete change in how the world is perceived that there would be no questions.
Yeah, I see. It's sort of like you referenced the Matrix. That kind of reminds me of the thing where it's like a line of dialogue from there, which says it's sort of like being the one is like being in love. You just know it. Sort of like this kind of reminds me of that. But I understand what you mean.
Yeah.
So
it's almost well, actually not almost. It's very much like when you wake up in a dream. You have a type of lucidity in it.
Oh, okay.
The dream persists.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I actually have lucid dreams quite often, so that kind of helps to connect the dots a little bit.
That's why I chose to start the book with the chapter about the dream. And you can also see the piece by Chuladasa that I published that's called What's It Like to Be Awake?
Yeah, I read it.
It's very much that. In some sense, in the same way that when you wake up in the lucid dream, it's not necessarily immediately available, but as soon as you think about it, you're like, wait, all of the entities that I see are me. I'm constructing this dream right now, right? And you cannot unsee it. You can forget it in another dream, right? But you cannot lose contact with everything that I'm seeing. Like I'm flying around, I'm battling demons, I'm having sex with who knows who, right? It's all my mind. And I'm still enjoying it, right? There's still something that feels productive in participating in the dream. But I'm not ignorant to the way that this is a dream. All entities are underlied by the same dreamer. That's very much the same experience, or like a very similar flavor of it, but in this greater consensual reality that we inhabit, not just inside our minds in a dream state.
Yeah, except in the waking state, it's not just my mind, right? Or like, I mean, it is, but there's other entities outside, sort of like. And
It's a question of perspective, right?
well, yeah.
One dreamer, and it has, you know, one dreamer and like multiple puppets, just like, or these distinct entities, right? And it's not that it's true or false. It's just what is the perspective that you're taking. And what I'm saying is, upon the eradication of the final ignorance, you cannot choose unconsciously to only see like this. You're not stuck in the separateness anymore. Right? You can choose to interface like this, and you still do, of course, even just out of compassion, right? Because other entities may not know that they're dream entities, so to speak, right? Just like in a lucid dream sometimes. Exactly the same way. But you lose the ignorance around it.
Yeah.
And again, that is something that can happen in extreme psychedelic states. A lot of people, including Chulodasa, he shared with me that he was driven to go on the path because of psychedelic experiences that he had in the 60s or 70s.
Mm-hmm.
I think many modern Buddhist teachers started the path this way.
Yeah. It's sort of like one thing about what you said is sort of still confuses me is that sort of like this notion that, well, there are other entities. And sort of like my mind jumping between the sort of like, yes, like it is my mind that's processing all of it, but like those entities see things differently, and therefore
Right.
it's just like it's not quite the same as the lucid dream where I can say that it's all the product of like my mind body dreaming it up.
Well, you could say that it's an act of a larger mind body that's beyond just the Alex meat bag, so to speak.
Yeah. Mm.
Now we're getting into
Yeah.
physics, story.
Yeah.
Crucially, what's important as we peel off the layers of ignorance is also to notice any story that we are attached to, because any type of perception, story, narrative, this is how the world is, necessarily is some stake in the ground that we then forgetting ourselves into perceiving from. And any type of story like this, as lucrative as it can be, you can also see as an act of Mara, so to speak, in the sense of some coordinaries using that story to be like, I am the one who knows the true reality. Therefore, listen to me about what I say is the correct line to pick up this girl in the bar right now. So any story, anything we're attached to in this sense, any story, any emotion, any body posture, this is how I have to be, this is my line of work, I have to get married to this person, any attachment is going to be where all the other attachments cling to and hide. Right? And that's the thing that we call Mara, and in some sense, in the suttas, the final boss that the Buddha was going through before his complete awakening, where as you loosen, those attached stories come up and start saying, no, but you have to keep yourself safe against blah, blah, blah. If you meditate too hard, what's going to happen to your relationship with blah, blah, blah? What's going to happen to your portfolio? What's going to happen to, right? Oh, but the story that I have, that the world is this way and that way. And of course, the story of a separate self is the one that's really, wait, all of this was a dream? All of my stuff was just me struggling inside of my mind, right? And then if you go beneath it sufficiently, that's the cosmic joke. You start laughing. but before that, it's just like for quite some time.
Yeah.
want to
maybe
go
an
further.
interesting point, since we were talking about lucid dreams. I read a book called The Tibetan Yogas of Dream and Sleep. And in it, because you were talking about how in a lucid dream you can fly and do all these fun things, and you know you're creating the story, but it's still fun. But I didn't have that experience. Like when I realized, oh yeah, it's me, of course you try it out, but it's like having cheats in a video game. Like the reward comes from the tension that was before, right? And then I looked that stuff up, and then it was about like empathizing with your dream characters and yeah, taking all these mental shapes in the dream. I don't know, maybe we will get into it later, but my question is like, is this, if we are based in fundamental consciousness and we're actively creating a story, are there still more skillful ways to create stories?
I would say yes. It's by definition, in some sense, due to the expansion of the degrees of freedom that you have when you're not constrained by some narrow range in the option space. Right? If you have the type of trauma that makes it so all of this area of possibility is out of limits and you only have this, right? I have to be this way. When you take this away, right, and every layer down, it opens up the entire space of possibilities, and you move more and more from the entirety of the wisdom that's available to any one of your coordinators, to any piece of your mind, versus the way that they are sort of slaved into operating just in this particular direction. Ask another question.
Yeah, so I've recently figured out that I can brainwash myself into things. So like, I was struggling with studying, and so I thought about, okay, what are the stories I have around studying that make it full of tension and make it difficult? And then I figured those out and also looked at some research and so on, and did like a little audiobook for myself. Like I used a text-to-speech model to basically, it's like a hypnosis file, I guess, that I listen to like actively deconstruct those stories, because I realized like seeing it once doesn't change my emotion about it so much, but hearing it over and over again does. And I'd like to hear your opinion. Like, I know that in meditation, for example, we have one coordinator take more power to like approximate this more skillful state, right? And do you think this like, yeah, what's the trade-off here? Like, is this a danger to make one coordinator much too powerful, or is it like also just an approximation that makes things go more smoothly?
Yeah, you're describing something where there's tension in the sense of you can go too much into a story and make it the new story, right? That's reified and attached, or you can use it as skillful means. And that's true for anything on the path. And I'll say Dan Brown has what is it called? The protocol, ideal parent protocol, where he lets you imagine the types of parents that you would have liked to have versus the ones that you had that left you with all those wounds and scars. And through that, there's a process of healing, because you show yourself what's possible. In some sense, you show yourself what you can be to yourself, to your own children, and to other people in the world. In some sense, you could do that with everything. And in the retreat that I'm planning, I've been toying with the idea of an ideal past. Once you have a sufficient understanding, or let's say insight into timelessness, or the construct of time, and it also becomes apparent how our memories and everything that we're carrying are echoes of something that doesn't exist anymore. Right? It's just some pattern that's vibrating and reverberating inside the mind, stories and smells and kinesthetic senses. From that understanding, you can decide to construct any origin story for yourself. In some sense, corresponding to what I was talking about, the way that we are replacing trauma with initiation. But it's not that once we have the initiation story, then we're stuck with the initiation. It's more of a balancing act. I'm taking the thing that I thought was the flaw and making it into something beautiful. It's very much the art of kintsugi. You guys know it. When something breaks, the Japanese just fill up the crack with gold versus trying to glue it back into perfection. And then the crack and the gold become something beautiful. But because the mind is much more dynamic, you don't have to stay with the scar, right? You don't have to be like, oh, I'm the one who survived the fire, and now I'm a fireman. You don't have to be a fireman forever just because you transcended or transformed the trauma of being burned as a kid into becoming an initiated fireman. You can do that for a few years, and then you feel done. You go somewhere else, and you're not holding any of the stories. So in a sense, you can tell any story about your past if it helps you dissolve whatever tension, whatever karma, whatever holding was there. And when that story is done, when you change it to your ideal past, there's one option where you go and you tell everyone that when you were a kid, when you were 4 years old, you pulled your mother out of the fire. Okay, people are going to think you're crazy. Don't do that. You don't have to buy into your story and make it into something that's a lie. It's just going to bring you more misery. But if going through a process of doing that helps you face the grief and the anger and the pain, and then once it's done, you just put it down. You no longer have any story about the past that's compulsively being told inside of your mind. Then it's great. Use whatever means are necessary. This is all a construction. So make a skillful construction. Make a liberating construction. In some sense, the essence of the message that I'm making in this chapter, and particularly the second part of it that we're going to talk about next week or the one after, is all meditation, or this whole process, is about taking skillful views. And the view can be the meditation. Let's view everything through a lens of gratitude. Let's really view just the sensations here so that we all collect on them. But a meditation or a skillful view can also be like, let me change the story that's echoing in my mind about how my past was like, so that it teases out all of the tiny schisms that are still all over in my mind because I've not felt the pain, not had the capacity to be with what now, from the greater perspective, I can integrate into my model of being until no model is needed.
Thank you.
Ideal parent figure protocol. Yeah, thanks, Jonathan.
I was wondering, like, about the time and space deconstruction. So how does that work? I think I had one experience like that, like on psychedelics, but it's just kind of, yeah. I was wondering if you could say something about that.
I have an experiment planned. If we have time, we can try that meditation also, that pointing around time. I saw someone briefly raise their hands. Maybe it was Jen. Sure. Is there any other question before we continue? Jen or anyone else? Yeah.
I was wondering, could you say more about how these stories help us kind of tease out those schisms so that we can feel things that we hadn't felt before?
Yeah. The simplest way to illustrate this is to say to yourself, let's say something like, the sky is purple. If you say the sky is purple, nothing might happen. Nothing much happens, right? There's no stake in it. You're like, maybe a voice comes up, well, it's blue, right? But you don't really care. If you say to yourself something that is in apparent contradiction with some other story you have about yourself, right? If you think you're smart and you say, I am stupid, something's gonna press, something's gonna resist. There's gonna be some sensations angrily informing you in your body that it's not true. So if you have the story, if to continue using the fireman example, if someone considers that they're weak or lack courage because when they were a kid they escaped their house as it burned down, if they say, I am courageous, all of the evidence to the contrary is going to come up. And underlying the evidence is the unfelt, unprocessed pain. And so as you go deeper and deeper into a process like this, as you tell a story of your bravery in that time, whether it's an alternate reality or identifying the places where you were brave when you, as a 4-year-old kid crawled out of a burning house, you will be challenging every coordinator who's built their entire career and identity on the sense of, no, I lack courage. So it's an act of mental yoga. You take another shape, the shape of a story that contradicts what you're used to, and that stresses the story that's under attachment. As you go through this process, you see that you can tell either story. Like freedom is obvious when you can tell every story and you're not feeling the pain, the contraction, the anger, any emotion, any type of coordinated movement that's associated with the story, with that origin story, with the pain that has not been integrated.
That's helpful. And then once they come up, does it just automatically integrate? Because
some of it does, depending on how expanded you are, depending on the basis of operation. Some might need some more, let's say, the therapeutic tools. And that's the realm of infinite skill, right? So many different ways of being with a wounded being with a traumatized entity. Yeah. So there's a wide range of skills here. And again, worth mentioning that in the first turning, all of those issues were in some sense spiritually bypassed all the way into nirvana, where they don't come up anymore, at least in meditation or in whatever monastery you're in. But as soon as you come into contact with the type of circumstance that would stimulate that story out of you, it compulsively comes up. Unless you do the type of work that partly involves therapy and shadow work and integration and growing up and cleaning up and showing up, that makes it so those stories don't hold any of that charge anymore. And it's only then that you can fully be in the world without samsaric compulsion. And I want to use that opportunity to say that that's not where I'm at. This is also the edge of my practice. There's so much of my psyche still that compulsively makes me jump out of the less ignorant states. I want to make that clear. In some sense, you could say that the definition of Buddha is the person who has cleaned out, maybe not everything, it's hard to know about everything, but 99.19 something percent of the karmic charge, and has grown up to be able to be in the world from the highest perspective without the compulsion of samsara and without collapsing into lower perspectives that have to do with those traumatic origin stories. That's where we're going. The home is the lack of ignorance, is the basing in fundamental consciousness, is seeing that structures arise as empty, where we recognize them as expressions of the ground. Full Buddhahood comes only when we clear out all of that baggage, all of the karmic debt.
So is integration, that word I have a hard time like wrapping my head around. Is it it comes up and is seen as empty, or like what is integration? How would you kind of
So emptiness is taking the rigid structure and loosening up a little bit so that it can be reformed into a more developed structure. So the solution is emptiness or waking up. Growing up is making it more sophisticated. And you have a hard time making this into this if you don't dissolve it a little bit, make it flexible.
And that is the integration process, to kind of see, letting everything come up, seeing as empty, and then reconstructing.
Yeah, the integration. I like the word integration because healing assumes that something is broken, something is damaged, and in that sense, people, it's all words and they all have their downsides. But sometimes the notion of healing can send people down a rabbit hole of forever trying to fix every little bit of them. Integration, I like a little more because it's in some sense bringing every part of the mind into the highest level of collaboration, perception, sophistication, wisdom that's available to the mind. And in this regard, it's also never-ending work because there's always new wisdom that's found. There's always new dimensions to existence that we discover. And then from the ever-deepening basis, you continually integrate any part that has not yet received the message into this greater whole. This perspective, even trauma, is an act of wisdom. At the time, that's the highest act of coordination, systemically speaking, that could have been done. And so it's not that it needs healing so much. Of course, there's pain, but that pain doesn't need to be healed by a sense of giving it medicine. That, you could also use that as a perspective. We give the medicine of love to the part that's wounded. We give it tenderness and gentleness. But I generally prefer to use the perspective of this was the highest possible move. Now we're helping it by letting it dissolve, showing it that it's safe to not hold on so hard. And when it's dissolved, we can show it how to interface and connect better with the rest of the system that has since grown and developed.
Okay, that makes sense. Awesome, thanks.
Jonathan?
It's funny, I started formulating my question before Jen went, and then you started addressing a lot of what I was going to ask around, in particular around how I feel like the most challenging growth edge for my practice is on the relational component, and what seems like can be a struggle between I guess my experience and other people's experience, and being more and more cognizant of how the things I say, the actions I take, how what that elicits in other people, and trying to looking for balance between acting in skillful, compassionate ways toward other people that's also treating myself in like compassionate ways. And by that I mean noticing how it can seem like at times why is it that that the types of people we resonate or experience dissonance with some people we like energetically touch, other people we just go past, and there's no kind of intersection just naturally. And so and anytime I experience that, like looking for ways to tend to myself while also tending to others, gosh, this is not a very concise question.
I get what you're saying.
Trying to feel around the shape of it, because it's like, what if I'm just by myself, very easy to experience a lot of what you're describing, and what feels like very grounded, very more and more skillful. And then the moment interacting, or in moments when I'm interacting with people where there's a lot of like I don't know, karmic overlap or what have you. It's like looking to disentangle that karma or burn it off effectively, without generating more, and it gets really messy really quickly. And a lot of like the path you're describing in the books, you know, feels like simple, straight, relatively speaking, straightforward. It's just like, you know, like a progressive reduction, let's
It
say.
is simple, but it's also challenging.
And then the relational component just radically increases the complexity in a way that can feel tempting to want to retreat as a way to solve the complexity.
So suddenly, sometimes retreating is the best way we have to take care of ourselves. Don't see that as failure. It's something that we just have to do it sometimes at some points. Let's see. Once you understand what's at the foundation of the friction, lack of compatibility, it does become very simple. Again, it's not easy, it's very challenging, but the essence of it is simple. And I'm going to use the same space metaphor. Like if my entire Zoom screen here, the range of possibilities, every trauma that we have that's locking us in a particular direction is cordoning off parts of the space. So we only have this part of the space available. Any person who fits here, we will resonate with. Anyone who's anywhere else, we will either like energetically. Well, I'll say it this way. Do you know how sometimes you walk into a room and some people immediately like lock eyes with you, or they'll like feel inviting, and another person is like making their best not to ever come into eye contact with you or even to acknowledge your resistance? It's like he's energetically just invalidating you. You don't exist. And of course we do the same, right? Because of those preferences. There's something that knows even before any level of concept or knowing the person, just based on how the person is holding themselves, the facial expression, the emotion that we sort of feel bubbling underneath, that we ourselves are not allowed to feel. All sorts of power dynamics, all sorts of ideas of what would happen to my identity if I talk to this particular person. So it's all this. And every aspect of another person that I have a hard time with, not because they're doing something that's immediately offensive to me, right? If someone is hitting me, or energetic compatibility doesn't matter so much. But every part that I immediately disqualify about a person, or they're speaking to me and I'm irritated, regardless of the content of their words even, reflects some part of ourselves that has not been integrated. Some part of ourselves that we're not loving and holding with unconditional service. And in some sense, once that is sufficiently seen and integrated, the path of seeing those frictions with other people becomes even exciting, because you're like, oh, here's another part of myself that I've lost contact with, that I have now a chance to bring online into the greater coherence of what I am. And before we do enough of this process of being all right with every part of us, it's impossible to jump out of the dream and start more and more identifying with the bigger dreamer, so to speak, come into the fundamental level of consciousness without the ignorance. Ignorance is sustained by the compulsion to push away, right, this side of the space, and to crave and go towards compulsively this part of the space. I can only play with these people because they're safe, right? Because they correspond to my definition of what's safe. Maybe they're all very rational. Maybe they all are very soft-spoken. But all of those people who are emotional and who have extreme bursts of anger, they are unsafe. And I cannot be with them, right? And so this movement of pushing those away is also a movement of pushing inside. And the inside is a mirror of the outside, or it's all fractal, let's say, right? That's a more elegant description. Unless we untie all of those knots, we simply cannot go beyond samsara. We're trapped compulsively and unconsciously, and this is the reality that's correct, and I'm only willing to interface with it. Everything else I'm gonna kill or ignore or suppress, be in some forever war with.
Yeah, to ask I guess a kind of follow up to that in concrete terms. So I've noticed with my clients and as a psychotherapist how even the most challenging aspects of them, really my emotional experience is just love and compassion and appreciation and care and very like a holding. Whereas with people in my life, could be very similar aspects of them, but then there's that like that growth edge, that conflict where it's just this
Yeah. Search for the thing that's at stake. Search for the underlying meaning. If this happens, what does it mean? What is the meaning from which I am acting? What is at stake if I don't get from them the thing that I'm kind of upset that I'm not getting? And that's a whole other topic. There's actually an exercise that I want us to do at some book club soon that touches on this, on like meaning and how it plays a part. But now I have another exercise that I want.
Thank you.
So let's go into that. And by the way, I have a chapter, all of this that I have not published yet is actually quite ready. I can share the draft of it with you if you want, or with whoever leaves me a note on WhatsApp. Now let's do the exercise. Let's see. Okay. So in the context of emptiness, to get a good sense of it, I want you all to try something that I'm sure you've done in some points of your life, but just to like really bring it home and get a taste of what this can look like. So find a comfortable position, just a place where you can keep your head focused on something for a few minutes, and find some non-moving object in the space. I'm looking at my keyboard. Also have my microphone here and my phone and mouse and camera, and you can also look at the screen, but that might be a little distracting. So have you all found an object? Blink once for yes. Great. So as you look at the object, I want you to notice, this may have already happened, so you may want to call it up in mind, what meaning this object has in the picture of your life. Maybe a memory of where you got it, what it means to you, maybe someone gifted it to you. What do you use it for? How it feels like to use it, what it calls on you to do or to feel. And notice where those images come up. Notice where those memories, where those sensations exist. Take another half a minute and play with this. And even without any further instruction, you might notice that similarly to how when you say a word multiple times, it loses its meaning. It becomes just a collection of sounds. Maybe what you're noticing about the object is now less the meaning and more the immediate sensory perception. And even if it's not the case, you can, just through the power of intention, just simply the desire to see it a certain way, focus on the sensory perception. Focus on the pixels of perception. It's the color, the shape, texture. And see if you can see them moment to moment. Of course, we've mostly chosen solid objects, but even for those, you can see how your perception refreshes a few dozen times per second. Even if an object is black, it registers as black or any other color, if you continue looking, you can probably find every color in existence, sort of moving, shimmering, vibrating, pulsing. It's the gajillion different sensations in every part of the space of perception, any part of the visual space. And again, this is easiest to do if you really lock your gaze in place, if you don't move too much. You can see that you don't exactly get the streaming green symbols of the matrix. But in some sense, you see that this type of perception, of course, has always been there. It's just been abstracted by the layers of meaning, by this is that object, this is its name, this is what I do with it, this is what it feels to do with it. Of course, you might be familiar with this type of practice just through the breath practice that you might have done, where we go into faster and faster vibrations and start breaking down the sense of this is breath or this is out breath and in breath. It's just sensation after sensation. You might even notice that because we're deconstructing experience this way, might be some more coherence in your body, might be less tension. It's normally the battleground between units of reified meanings. That is to say, just breaking down some of the world model into its components creates some peace. It futzes with the capacity of the mind to hold a lot of the world model together. But for the sake of our practice, I want you to notice how easily it is for you, just with some conscious intention, to jump between seeing whatever you're looking at from the perspective of its pixels, lacking meaning, and the meaning. This is my blank. I bought it at time. I like using it to blank. Again, just the pixels. And see if you can do both at the same time. Doesn't have to be perfect, but see if you can be with this layer of really fast pulsating sensations, visual bits, and some story about them. And then you can say, I am choosing right now to draw a line between this mess of visual sensory bits such that it becomes keyboard. I am choosing to consider how I enjoy the tactile sense of pressing the keys. Now again, I choose to just see the sensations. And it's not that the keyboard disappears. Of course, it's still there. You can always pull up keyboard, unless you've taken too much psychedelics and you're really high right now. But what is at the forefront? What is at the foreground? You can continue doing this while I invite you to share your experience. Tell us how this went. If he wants to deconstruct it to speak, I see. Yeah, go for it.
I mean, I've done this practice a lot in the past, and every time I'm just in awe how quickly things, like static things, could actually move. And what happened if I ignore the movement and see even more raw input, where it leads me and gets even more intense and more intense, and the brightness is getting like I'm getting more contrast, if that makes sense, and shifting in between those high sensory raw input and keyboard. It's it gives a lot of a sense of control, I would say. Yeah.
Good. Anyone else?
It was interesting how it immediately had a lot of emotional content available when you queued that up. And also very quickly started strobing between like seeing it from like the perspective of one eye than the other eye, like breaking down the unified field of vision into kind of the, you know, the frame offset, which is not something I've experienced before. So that was curious.
Cool. Yeah, we unearth all of our assumptions. So important to say, again, we don't walk around the world like we are seeing the green symbols of the matrix sort of lost in it, right? This starts happening naturally and in a way that doesn't need to confuse us or to have us continually have to choose to construct the world. We can trust our system to do that naturally. As we go to higher bases, this happens by itself. And unless there's more someone wants to say, and we do have time for this, we can also try fucking around with time a little bit. So normally to do this, we would be on retreat, and I've had some time to collect the mind and to unfind the self, and a few other meditations, but I'm sure we can get at least a little taste of this. Let's do it this way. I want at least one or two of you to tell me in 30 seconds or less what time is. This is not about getting it right. What is time?
A chain of cause and effect where things influence what comes next, and we're just kind of clicking forward one link at a time.
And
What else?
a name we give to changes we perceive.
Anything else?
Measure of change.
Again?
A measure of change.
Measure of change. And Alex?
What came to my mind was sort of like moments of consciousness, kind of like Shulidas's model type of thing, in sequence.
So, measuring change, sequence of cause and effect, all of those, of course, are evidently happening. You can observe things changing. But where is time? It's certainly not something that's measured by observing some universal clock somewhere out in space. It's not that GMT 0 somewhere in the UK is somehow the beginning of time. There's no time stone there, right? It's not like we have, like in the place where they're holding the perfect kilogram to measure things against. There's no time unit that's somehow synchronizing everything. It's all a conception. It's all a consensus. It's something that we've agreed on. It's a construct meant to help people collaborate. So if time is a story about how things change, what if we told a different story? If you notice things in your environment right now, using just the visual and the auditory, of course, any sense, but let's try just with those two. What if you shifted from things moving in time to everything is already here now, and things don't come and go, they've already always been here. Nothing is arising and passing. Nothing is ultimately changing. And I want you to turn your attention to the knowing that's at the foundation of awareness, and the sense of it never having changed. So there's something that doesn't change in time, perhaps doesn't ever change. It's knowing, awareness. And then this phenomena, and it's moving, it's undisputably moving. Maybe we can see it as not coming from anywhere or going anywhere in time. It's just always having been here. Almost like the knowing, always already having been here. For me, when I do this, there's a flattening of the space. There's less of a sense of bumpiness or unevenness in the space of awareness that's caused by so many things being caught in a construct of time. Generally, there's a little less past and future. And it's hard to even point at anything that I can call the present. So what's your experience like? What subtle shifts are you noticing?
I can only describe it as a moment feeling infinite.
Hmm?
I think I'm noticing that flattening of space, sort of like I recognize what you're saying in my experience. But at the same time, I have this kind of some sort of struggle or conflict in my mind about that, and I'm not quite sure what it is about. It's just like the sense of tension,
Yeah.
but there is no clarity about what the essence of that tension is like. What is it is about? So yeah, it's kind of
When
maybe
we
it's
remove those assumptions, we also remove them as the glue for mental constructs, the type that normally cover conflict that's underneath, unprocessed emotions, unprocessed pain, right? And so in this, you can see the essence of how the layered constructs, layered assumptions that we are compulsively creating all the time are the defense system against the intensity that's lying underneath. And in this process of taking away the assumptions, it starts coming up and we can start feeling, we can start integrating. So tension coming up when doing a process like this is a sign of doing it right. And as you handle the tension, as you see the thing that normally the time resists and pushes down, right, or any one of those assumptions, the need for constructing starts dissolving, and you can be in this. Normally, we say eternity for infinite time. You can start more and more being in this eternity. That's not outside of time, but it's not bound by time.
Yeah, I think something that you said just sort of like brought back some memories or experiences that I had that were kind of felt timeless, but then at times as time went on, perhaps because of some trauma or something, that didn't seem accessible anymore. But now I kind of see that, well, there is something there. There was a change. So thanks.
So again, this is just a taste. To go all the way with this type of exploration, I really recommend doing the Dust in the Perna retreats that I keep mentioning, the Rigged Sin tradition. If anyone doesn't have the details, then poke me. I'll send you the details. Yeah, and I'm thinking about doing relevant retreats myself. But again, for now, just a little taste, just a sense of how this can look like. And even if you don't do something like this extraordinary type of practice, emptying out time, and then again the space and the self and thoughts and emotion and perception and so on, any genes that you start taking off will have a similar effect. Anytime you see through constructs, right, just even by seeing the pulsating sensations, will start unearthing what's underneath, start showing you the conflict, start showing you what the foundation of the conflict from which the construct springs is. And that gives you more degrees of freedom. You can decide what you want to do with it. And now, from the perspective of a person who's lived for a few decades versus a little kid who might have been defenseless, optionless, now you have much more you can do than push down the pain. Okay, so we're at time for today. And so I will just mention that next week we're going to do part 2. We're all just walking each other to the same home, where we're going to continue exploring the way that all meditation is views. This notion of a liberating view, skillful view. Done a lot of it today. We're going to dive much deeper. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.